Good evening, everybody. I'm Neil Braun. I'm Dean of the Lubin School of Business. I know some of you, not all of you. Um, Today, we're marking the coming together of two great institutions, the Levine family and the Entrepreneurship Lab at Pace University. The Levine family is Ted Levine. He's the founder and chairman of Development Counselors International. Pat Levine, who's the vice president, and Andy Levine, who's President and Chief Creative Officer. Development Counselors International, DCI, is a leader in marketing places. Over the last 60 years, they've worked with more than 450 cities, regions, states, and countries to attract both investors and visitors. They developed a niche business and became a market leader. They've established, grown, and transitioned a family business. So they can hit a lot of topics that are of interest to all of us. The Entrepreneurship Lab at Pace is involved in a number of things. I hope most of you have visited the lab over at 163 Williams. If you haven't, you should really see it. It's great collaborative space, whiteboard paint, every kind of equipment you might need, including a 3D printer, lots of opportunity and mentoring from Professor Blackenheimer and others, and other faculty and staff. The Entrepreneurship Lab is really hitting stride. It's in our third year. They are doing a veterans boot camp that's being funded by Blackstone. One of how many, Bruce, how many? Six in the country were awarded this opportunity to work with Blackstone on providing an entrepreneurship boot camp for veterans, and we're very proud to be part of that. We recently received a major gift from an alum, and through that we are building a relationship with the MIT Enterprise Forum in Israel to bring tech entrepreneurs to New York and provide them with the business back office and infrastructure that entrepreneurs need. And of course, we always have the app design, business plan, and PACE pitch contests on an ongoing basis year to year. So there's a lot going on at the Entrepreneurship Lab too. And now the latest initiative is this one, the Levine Initiative, which is about proof of concept funding. Based on the experience starting DCI, Ted and Pat Levine generously are supporting students and young alumni to do proof of concept work to understand if their business idea might flourish in the real world. And through this proof of concept entrepreneurship initiative, 2 grants of up to $7,500 each are available to PACE students from any of the schools, as well as alumni who've graduated in the last 2 years to help test their business ideas. So once again, I want to express my very sincere thanks to the Levine family. We really appreciate both the gesture and your commitment and your involvement with the Lubin School of Business and Pace University. Thank you so much for what you're doing. We really do appreciate it. And with that, I want to turn it over to Professor Bruce Blackenheimer, who's going to make more formal introductions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Braun. We're fortunate to have a dean who's very supportive of the entrepreneurship program. I'd like to welcome everyone, especially our guests from outside of Pace University, and thank Professor Casey Frid for bringing his international entrepreneurship class, Management 319, and Professor Aaron Laurie for bringing his marketing research class, Marketing 322. Also the staff of the eLab, who does a lot of work to pull all this together, especially Nikhil Kalyankar, our Associate Director. And most of all, I'd like to thank the Levines, Ted, Pat, and Andy. If I could ask people not to turn off your mobile phones, but just to put them on silent. As you see, we're recording, but please do use them to tweet or any other way to promote the event on social media. And if you'd like, we're going to have Q&A at the end, and if you'd like to submit a question, we're using our addresses, the handles at Pace eLab, PACEELAB, and for this event, if you'd use the hashtag Levine Grants, that's hashtag Levine Grants. So I'm Bruce Blackenheimer. I'm a clinical professor of management here at Pace, and I'm also the executive director of the Entrepreneurship Lab. The lab is a space that's at 163 William Street, just a block away from here. You don't need a passport or anything special to go there. It's on the third floor, and it's a collaborative workspace designed to bring together students from all 6 of Pace's schools and colleges to work together. We have a number of events going on that the dean mentioned: the pitch contest, business plan competition, app design contest. We also have a lot of speakers, speaker series. We have all kinds of technology equipment, from a 3D printer to high-end Alienware computers, Macs, PCs, tablets, etc. We also have a video studio and a classroom, a private breakout room, collaborative workspace, etc. And importantly, a dedicated staff that has a variety of background. We have a graduate assistant with some very high-level finance skills. Nikhil, the associate director, has some great technical skills, and we try to bring all that together. So if you'd like to learn more about the eLab, the best thing is to visit it. Again, right across the way at 163 William Street on the 3rd floor, or if you go to pace.edu/eLab, E-L-A-B. So I'd like to go right into the panel discussion, just to give you a little idea how the evening will flow. We're going to have some questions for Ted and Andy Levine, and then after that, and they have some slides at the end, and then I'm going to ask Pat Levine to come up, and we're going to formally introduce and kick off the Ted and Pat Levine Entrepreneurship Initiative, which makes grants available to you guys. No equity, no interest, just a cash grant to help you do a proof of concept and launch a company.
It's kind of like an ATM.
And then we'll have the opportunity for Q&A, both live and again, I would invite you to tweet about the event and to ask questions through Twitter. So to start off, instead of me talking about DCI or its founder, Ted Levine, I'd like to ask Ted, if you would, please tell us a bit about the early history of DCI and what led you to the concept, and how do you go about turning that concept into an actual business?
Okay. I'm Ted Levine. I started the firm. To go back, I think we have to go back 55 years to 1959, and I was with the government of Puerto Rico. I was the director of marketing and public relations for the government of Puerto Rico, and we had really 4 jobs there. We tried to attract industry and investment. We tried to attract tourists. We tried to promote Puerto Rican rum, which was extremely important because it funded the whole program. And finally, we had a small program to promote Puerto Rican fashions. And I was the person who was in charge of that particular part of the program. Wonderful job, tremendous amount of excitement, and a tremendous amount of results. And in that very year, I got a second piece of good news, and that was that the State Department had allocated a small but substantial grant to Puerto Rico for the purpose of having would-be developers from developing countries come to Puerto Rico and see what had been done and what would be adaptable, what would be practical, and what wouldn't be, because Puerto Rico was a very special case because it was part of the United States, and yet it had the attributes in some ways of a country. It was a commonwealth, which it still is. So I met with many people from Africa, Asia, and Latin America, and it was a tremendous amount of fun. And during that year, I also conceived of an idea, which is probably to me more important than even the earlier work with Puerto Rico. And the idea was simply this, and I think it's still a new idea. The idea was that there are many marketing agencies. In this city alone, in New York, there are hundreds, probably thousands of marketing agencies that market products or market services. An example of products would be automobiles. So there are some agencies that specialize in automobile marketing. Of service would be insurance. That would be an example. But I had never heard of a company that marketed places exclusively. And it seemed to me there might be a niche that would really work in that particular area. And so I decided, it was a very hard decision, just as I think it's probably a very hard decision for you guys to leave something that's very good and then to move on and try something on your own. But I felt very motivated to do it. And on July 1st, 1960, I really launched DCI. And I want to, we started in a good position. We started with 2 clients. One of those clients was Puerto Rico. I got a contract with the Economic Development Administration to continue the work I was doing for 1 year. So we weren't hanging out a shingle with nothing on it. And the second one was New South Wales, Australia. And the head of that operation in New York happened to be in the building next to us on Fifth Avenue, and I met with him and I talked to him. But the real hope here, both of those could get us started, but we had an idea that we thought was really nifty. At least I had an idea. I didn't have any other people at that time. The idea was that there were going to be a whole bunch of new countries that would be minted in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Not so much Latin America, but Africa and Asia. And the biggest of them all was Nigeria. Nigeria in those days had about 50 million people. Now it has over 100 million people. And the day of independence for Nigeria was supposed to be, and was to be, October the 31st, 1960. And I approached the people, the ambassador in New York, and we met, and they liked the idea, and we signed them up. And this was unlike anything that I expected. It was a much bigger program than we expected we'd ever start with, much bigger budget, much larger versatility and variety of different kinds of marketing. And it was planned to really make DCI on October 31st, 1960. I'm going to stop at this point because that's how we started, but I want to later on go on and tell you a little bit about what happened.
Well, and leading into that, can you talk about, one of the hardest things for new ventures to do is to scale up, to expand, because now you're you have about 50 people and in 50 different countries, I believe. And by the way, there's biographical information in the program and the hyperlinks. But can you talk about 2 things? One, what some of the early growth challenges were and how you were able to overcome them and scale up on an international basis.
Okay. I want to tell you the story of Nigeria because it was so terribly important to us in that vital first year. And for all of you, the first year is extremely vital. I told you we had a huge budget. We had a huge program. We were tremendously excited. This thing turned out to be a huge flop. Why? That was very simple. On that day, October the 31st, 1960, there was a military coup, and a new government was put in power, and they knew virtually nothing about us, and we had to try to get to them and sell them an entirely different group of people. Fortunately, I wasn't shot or assassinated, but aside from that, it was very difficult for us to establish the program. It took us about 3 months to do it, and during those 3 months, it was very important we get paid, because this was to be our big project. We were paid partially, not by the Nigerian government, as it turned out, but by the World Bank. And the whole thing was something of a flop. We lost a certain amount of enthusiasm. We were a little bit disillusioned by it because it was we thought such a good idea. We did some good things for the government, but they were piecemeal. It wasn't this huge program tied to the first day of DCI. Unfortunately, we had the same kind of experience with Thailand a couple of months later. A military coup and great difficulty in carrying out the program we had promised. And at the end of, I want to kind of bring you up to how we got started, because we were at a pretty low ebb at that point. That was perhaps 6 months after we got started. We had maybe 2 people, me and a secretary, and then Patricia, my wife, was helping us out. Time went on, and we were looking for some kind of salvation because this whole damn thing didn't seem to be working out at all. It wasn't at all what I thought it was going to be, and I'd left a damn good job for it at Puerto Rico.
I was about to be born, by the way, so.
That's right. That was another feature of our life at that time. At the end of about 7 months, as I recall, I got a call from Barbados. I'm curious, how many? Raise your hand if you know what Barbados is or anything about it. Raise your hand. Barbados is a small island in the Caribbean. It was then British controlled, and the guy who was calling me was a fellow by the name of Tom McLaughlin, who I had known many years before. And Tom said to me, it was just like a savior to me. He said, "Ted, I think we're ready for a pretty big program in the Caribbean for your firm development counselors." And he said, I've sort of cleared it with the key officials. All you need to do is go down to Barbados, and you got to meet with 3 people: the Premier, the Deputy Premier, and the head of the Barbados Development Bank. So we didn't have much money at that time, but we managed to get enough money to scrape together tickets, and I went down to Barbados. And at that particular point, what happened down there could be summarized by the words Murphy's Law. How many people know what Murphy's Law is? Raise your hand. Yeah, what is it? What can go wrong will go wrong. And every entrepreneur should remember that. What can go wrong will go wrong. The Premier got deathly ill, and he was summoned. He was forced to go to London because they didn't have the medical people that could cure or help what he had for an operation, which worked out, but it was a very difficult operation. He was out. The Deputy Premier was called to a special meeting of what was called the West Indian Confederation at that time in Miami. And the head of the Barbados Development Bank would not do a damn thing unless the other 2 people were present. He wouldn't even meet with us because he said the other people had to be present. And by the end of the day Wednesday, I'd come down there on Sunday, I was really frantic. I was worn to a frazzle, and also it was almost broke. Tom McLaughlin was a swell guy. He suggested to me, look, he said, this didn't work out. But let me make a suggestion. For $30 more, you can go down the chain of islands to Trinidad and Tobago, which is a fascinating place. And he said, you can really relax there. It's very interesting from a sociological point of view. You can go to the beach, and then you come back to New York refreshed, and it's going to cost you a song. So with some trepidation, I did it. I went down there, and it was a fascinating place. And on Thursday morning, I was sitting on a bench in the Queen's Park Plaza, beautiful park in Trinidad. And what I was particularly interested in was that sort of a parade of people were going through the park. There was an equal number of blacks and East Indians. And I had no idea there was many East Indians in the Caribbean. And as a matter of fact, that ratio is still true in Trinidad today, about an equal number of blacks and East Indians. I was sitting there and sort of imbibing the atmosphere on a beautiful day, and a guy sat next to me on that very bench. And you have to realize that at that time, in 1960, and this was toward the end of 1960, there were exactly 1 million people in Trinidad and Tobago. So I got a 1 in a million shot. The guy who sat next to me was the head of the Trinidad and Tobago Development Corporation, and his name was David Weintraub. And for the next 4 hours, the 2 of us sat at that bench, and we blocked out in high detail a program for Trinidad and Tobago. And that Trinidad and Tobago during the next 50 years, or most of the next 50 years, not all, because whenever the other party got in power, we tended to lose out. But most of the time, our party was ahead, and it became one of our best clients, and it saved us in this particular regard. I would remember the word luck, because that is a very important part of my story, and I suspect it's a very important part of your story. Let me now, in answer to what Bruce said, let me now tell you a little about how we grew after that, because I can do that quickly. End of the first year, I had taken no salary, not a dime. We had no profit, but we did break even. And even more important, we learned something. And what we learned was that the idea, and it was a new idea, of having a marketing agency specializing in places rather than products or services was a good idea. The thing I had done wrong, and really wrong, was go to the wrong end of the market. The underdeveloped countries are not the countries to go to. What you should go to are the richer countries, the bigger cities, and particularly the U.S. states, as it turned out. And having learned that lesson and almost lost everything, we with that knowledge, we began to go after that kind of client with a first year over, and it worked out well. I have notes here, our first state clients were Nebraska and New York, and I think we've now represented almost all of the U.S. states at one time or another. Andy, how many do you know?
43 of the 50 states.
43 of the 50 states. As far as cities were concerned, I think the first was Dayton, and we probably had 80 or 90 further cities later on with the history of DCI. Canadian provinces, again, I'll ask Andy, how many of the Canadian provinces?
I think 7 of the 10.
7 of the 10. And we did pretty well with countries as well. France, Germany, Ireland, and Belgium were among the first clients. And most important, the U.S. Department of Commerce, where we got 38 assignments, mainly to develop tourism studies in the underdeveloped areas within the United States. I want to say a word about our mode of organization and respond somewhat to what Bruce talked about in terms of growth. We had a very simple organization. It was the classic outside and inside organization. I was the outside guy doing most of the selling, and my former associate at Puerto Rico, Manny Alanis, did most of the clients, accompanied by, I think, 3 or 4 account executives and a small clerical staff. Our aim in those days, and it was not to grow, by the way. It was not to grow. Here's what our aims were. We wanted to keep the firm small. We wanted to keep it under a dozen people. We wanted to keep the costs as low as possible. And our accountant was tremendously important in that, the 2 accounts we had in the early days of the firm. We wanted it to be prestigious, and we wanted as little risk as possible, as little risk as possible. The years then went on, and we were making good money with a very small firm, having a hell of a lot of fun. Slowly, we accumulated a quality reputation, and which tended to discourage competition. We didn't want another firm going into economic development and specialize in places, and happily, no firm did. The years went by. And then late in 1990, after about 30 years in this business, everything fell apart. My partner, Manny Alanis, was in a taxi going to an important client meeting when he had a heart attack, and he immediately died in the taxi. And we had, at that time, 14 clients, and I approached every one of them with one of 2 options. The first was that I would shift from sales to service work, and we would continue to handle their assignments efficiently. The second was that we would carry out a full-length search to replace Manny Alanis with the best person anywhere on earth. And happily, all of the clients picked the second alternative. After a lot of research, a lot of interviews, a lot of referrals, we emerged with a choice, and that was a fellow named Andy Levine, who happened to be my son, and also by far the best candidate. And what I didn't realize, I sort of thought that Andy would follow very much in my footsteps and in the direction I've described to you guys. I did not realize the cataclysmic changes that he had in mind, and it's only when we get to Andy that we really talk about scale growth. Andy.
Okay, so as JFK said, on bringing RFK in as Attorney General. Nepotism is okay as long as you keep it in the family. So before we get to the scale, so much of entrepreneurship is, perceptions of feasibility and desirability. Is this something I can do? So if I could, before we get to the scale part, Andy, if you could reflect, as your dad mentioned, 96 is right when, you're about to be born. Can you reflect a little bit on your early memories of the firm and how it was going, and specifically on having, an entrepreneurial dad? Because a lot of people get into entrepreneurship, there may have been someone in their family that made it seem like, yes, this is something I could do. So if you reflect a little bit on the early memories of the firm and being raised by such an entrepreneurial father.
Sure. Two very, very quick stories. One of the things when my father was starting the firm, and my brother and I were, young kids, I don't know, 7 and 8, something like that, let's say. The mail used to get delivered on Saturdays in New York City. And so every Saturday we would go down to the office with him, and he'd check out the mail for a couple hours, maybe 2 hours or something. And we'd, I don't know, break the photocopier or do something, like that. So anyway, we're going down one of these Saturday mornings, and my father goes, "Oh, look, there are all these fire engines. I guess there's a building on fire or something." So that was sort of exciting to see until he discovered it was his building. And so lo and behold, the building was on fire. And we went home, and then he came back and tried to salvage whatever water damage there'd been and that sort of thing. My father, I guess early memories, to go back to that, Bruce, is just, here was a guy who just loved his work. And he really looked forward to going to work every day of his life. And that was a great role model to have. I think a lot of people don't love their work and don't love going to work every day. And to look at someone who just, loved what he was doing so much was a great, great role model to have.
No, and that passion is so important. And that idea that if you, love what you do, you never have to work a day in your life. Can you talk about a bit from when you first got in the company, any background, and then that transition period from, being brought into the company to taking on the leadership role? How did you, prepare for it, and how did it all go?
Yeah, sure. I was about 30 years old when I joined DCI. I had sort of worked for two service-related firms, so it was a similar type of business, but just a different end of the market. And so around Thanksgiving, my dad and I are going for a walk, and he was trying to figure out what he did next with DCI, and he was thinking about selling. He was thinking about trying to bring in someone else. I think this was after Manny had passed away, and he was really trying to figure out a solution to this. And I was, at the same time, had gotten about as far as I was going to go within this small entrepreneurial firm that I was working in, and a fundraising firm. It was run by two partners. They had run it together for 20 years, and there was sort of nowhere left for me to go. So, we were both sort of struggling with what we should do. And so my dad brings up and he goes, "Well, why don't you take over DCI?" I got to tell you, in my 30 years, I had never, ever thought of that. Never, ever considered that. So it was like a completely new idea to me. And I said, "Well, that's your firm." And he said, "Yeah, but you can do whatever you want with it." And it's like a big light bulb goes off in my head, this is sort of interesting. This is sort of attractive to me. I don't, because I one of the things I toyed with was, here I'm 30 years old. I could start my own firm and do my own thing. But here was this opportunity to take something that existed and was going pretty well and working pretty well. So we talked it over for a couple of months, went back and forth, and finally decided that, yes, this is a good idea. I will come into DCI, and I'm going to start as an account executive, sort of start at the bottom. I think there were 8 people working at DCI at the time, and sort of learn the business. At the time, I was then starting a new job. My wife and I had just bought a new house, and we had a new child on the way. So I was reading the Wall Street Journal at some point, and there was an article about the most stressful moments in someone's life, and they were a new home, a new job, and a new child. And I was experiencing them all exactly the same time. So anyway, I went to work, and the first year was kind of I don't say disaster, but was concerning because, I sort of jumped right into the pool. There was absolutely no training program at DCI. It was sort of like, here's your desk, here's your phone, go do whatever it is that we do. And, there was no training going on. So I was immediately given 3 clients, which is what an account executive did. And within 3 months, I'd lost 2 of the 3. So I was not off to a great start. At the same time, a recession hit and our revenue started going down pretty strongly.
Worst year we ever had.
Yes. We've been around for 54 years. There's 1 year that we were unprofitable. It was the year I started. So I remember my wife saying to me one night, she said, Andy, do you think this was a good idea? And, I really had to think about it, but we stuck it out and it ended up being a very good choice. As Ted mentioned, we have built up from the 8 people when I started to about 54 people today. Some of them are here tonight, actually, which is nice. We have built a reputation as the leader in marketing places. And we've been profitable for 22 of the 23 years that I've been involved in the firm. So just summing up sort of my first year, towards the end of the first year, I was at a cocktail party and there was someone else who both Ted and I knew, and this guy pulled me aside and said, so how's it going? And I said, well, it seems to be going okay. I'm losing lots of clients, but once you get past that, it seems to be going okay. And he goes to me, have you and your dad had an argument yet? I think I'd been at DCI for about 6 months. And I said, we haven't. He said, then you're never going to have an argument. And it really was true. So we worked together for, 20 years, 19 years, something like that. And I think we never had an argument because my father, unlike some entrepreneurs, he was ready to let go. And he, basically said, listen, I'm going to advise you. Any question you bring to me, I'll give you my best advice. I'll give you my best thinking, but the decision is yours. And I always appreciated his willingness to basically let me succeed or fail. And thank goodness it ended up being a success.
Great.
I want to add, if I can, just one word. The reason I did that, well, one of the main reasons, and I think this is important for any entrepreneur, is that I found, to my surprise, because I'd never done it before, that the selling part of the job was what I really loved. I loved being in a client's shoes and trying to think out what the client would want and then speaking, in a sense, for him or her. And so Andy could take over the running of the business, and I continued in the part I loved best. And that was one of the reasons I think we worked out well, because that was something I loved, and the running of a firm was something I didn't love at all. I would also just say that I think the extreme conservatism, which I had, and I saw it as a little tiny boutique firm. I didn't see at all the vision of what could be done with it. And I think, Andy, you might just say a word about how we ever went, because at the time I didn't believe it was possible, from 8 people to 54 people.
We have our method of growth. There are different ways you can grow. You can try to just simply get more clients, and eventually you're going to run out of countries and cities that can hire you, but that's one way to grow. Another way to grow is you can go into new industries. You could go into real estate. You could represent hotels. You could do things that are logically related to place marketing. We didn't do either of those things. We grew by offering a greater suite of services to our clients. So rather than just simply getting more clients, we said, what can we do for these clients that needs that they have that go beyond what we're doing for them already? So originally when I started, we might have offered 3 or 4 different types of services that people could buy. Now we offer maybe 15 or 20. And so the goal was to gain a larger share of existing client than simply to gain more clients. And we've proven very successful at that.
Okay. And the whole aspect of family business within small business management, entrepreneurship is a whole nother area, and it's interesting. Very few family firms make it to the 3rd generation. I think it's less than 20%. But clearly this is
we haven't either, by the way.
Right, that's right. that's further down. But and you said Your child was just born when you took over. You were born when Andy when Ted just started. So let's see what the next step is. But I wanted to go in to ask you.
Can I just interrupt just for 1 minute? There's a saying I think is very good. The first generation builds the business. The second generation makes it succeed, and the third generation ruins it.
Okay.
Sounds great. Okay.
So what I wanted to ask is, Andy had talked about that there wasn't a formal training program to go in as a rep, but did you do anything to help him prepare to take over the reins? Not just him specifically training for him, but other transitions within the firm, other management in the firm or customers. So how did the that transition handoff work, and was there any particular thing you could speak about, a broader management from bringing someone in?
I'll start that out. The answer was, while I was in charge, the answer is none. I brought Andy in and with the idea he could do what he wanted, but I would always advise him. But what became very clear was those were the exact kinds of things he was interested in. Building the firm, the administration of the firm, and particularly the hiring of people, which I didn't care much about at all. So that I was very lucky. I never really became involved in a growth program, an expansion program, because my theory was I wanted a sweet business that would make a good profit return, and that'd be enough. Andy had an entirely different look at it, and I think any kind of growth or plan for growth began after Andy became the CEO. And I think you might say a word.
Yeah, I mean, Bruce, to your question, because I came from two, I'd worked for about 10 years at two similar sized firms to DCI. I think I had a bit of a sense of how a small firm operates, and that was helpful. But, did I take courses? Did I, have a mentor? Did I have an executive coach? That was 20 something years ago. None of that stuff was, well known or really existed. And so it was really, kind of like jump into the pool and let's swim around and see how this works. Today, I participate in a lot of those things. I'm part of a really excellent group of other similar CEOs of similar sized firms, and we meet twice a year, and that's like a really good source. I read a lot. There are lots of different things I do to try to keep up on things. But at the time, there really was no formal training going on.
Then can you talk about, again, with the growth, some of the strategies you had that you formulated, and can you talk about when it came to implementing those, in the company that, your father had started and run, how did some of that go? Was it intimidating, scary, exciting to put some new strategy in place? And what were some of the challenges in implementing a growth strategy and some of the surprises that came up?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly had our share of successes and failures. I think I am less conservative than Ted was in running the business, but I'm still, I'm not like a Bill Gates kind of risk taker kind of person as well. So, just to give you one example, one of the things that we implemented, I think it was about 5 or 6 years after I joined, was open book management. I don't know if any of you have studied that. It's a very interesting area. Basically, you make your books, you make your financials completely transparent to your entire staff. And so, when I brought this up to Ted and our accountant, the accountant, first of all, thought I was like completely out of my mind. Why would you possibly want to open your books up to your staff? And my answer was, I want them to behave the same way an owner would. And to do that, they need to have the same information. And so I think at the time, Ted, you probably thought it was pretty crazy as well. It has become a part of our culture in terms of just being an open book management company and something that's worked out pretty well for us. So that might be one example of a type of challenge and something that worked out.
You might describe how that was actually implemented in that every member of the firm in time became sort of a vice president in charge of finance.
Sure, and we've changed it around over time, but the basic concept is that each month at our monthly staff meeting, we sit down and we call it the game report, and it basically says, here are all the revenues of the firm by clients, and then here are all the firm's expenses, and then did we make money this month? Did we not make money? Thankfully, most months we make money, but whenever we accrue $100,000 in profit, we share 30% of that, or $30,000 across the entire company. So I get a check. Everyone in the company gets a check. And it's sort of a profit sharing program, but it isn't at the end of the year. It isn't a bonus program. It's, everyone's sort of seeing what's going on. The analogy I've used, it's like most companies, you're playing a game of basketball. Nobody knows if they're winning or losing because the scoreboard is completely covered up. What we've done is we've shared the scoreboard with everyone so they know, is the company doing well? Is the company winning? Is the company losing?
Good. Are there, other stories as far as what was some of the big challenges? Like, is it recruiting qualified people? Is it scaling up the systems to keep up with growth? Is it the demands on your time traveling around the world to meet with people? So what are some of those things? Because, in entrepreneurship, as opposed to small business, we really want to think of a scalable business model and really the ability to, expand. And you've done it on a global basis.
You hit upon the number one thing for our business, and I suspect for a lot, particularly service businesses, the number one thing, and that is the ability to find, hire, and train good people. And that's a huge, huge challenge for businesses our size. In sort of the beginning, Ted and I would interview somebody, and after they left the room, Ted and I would look at each other. Well, I kind of like that person. What do you think? Well, they seem good. Yeah, let's try them. Okay. And it was a very, lousy system. Yes. And sometimes it worked out fine and you'd hire great people. And the other 50% of the time you'd make a really bad hire, and then you'd have to, either they would leave in 6 months, they'd leave in a year, or you would end up firing them in a year. And it was very disruptive. And within a small company, that's a terrible thing. So we've gotten much more scientific about it. Some of the things that we do that are a bit unusual, we require 12 references of anyone that we hire, and we call them all. And you might think, God, that's pretty unusual, 12 references. I'll tell you, the FBI only requires 5 references when they hire an agent. It allows, anyone in this room can come up with 3 people that are going to say good things about you. When you have to come up with 12, it becomes more difficult. So sometime on that 8th, 9th, or 10th interview that I'm doing on a reference check, things come out that wouldn't have come out on the first 3. So it gives me a much more complete picture of the person. We require a peer interview. So if we're trying to hire someone for an account executive position, I want that candidate to sit down with someone who's actually doing that job. Because I don't want them to hear about DCI through me. I want them to hear through the eyes and ears of someone who's actually doing that job. So frankly, they know what they're getting into. So there are a bunch of things like that, but that is probably the biggest challenge for any small or mid-sized service firm, is finding, attracting, and training good people, and then of course keeping them.
No, it is. I've got the opportunity to interview a lot of entrepreneurs and some very successful ones, and almost 100% credit the success to hire someone smarter than me and delegate. And it's really hard. And it's interesting when I see the students writing business plans, it's all, we're going to distinguish ourselves by, superior service. But then it's like, we're going to pay minimum wage and, just get student interns and do things that way. It's very, very hard to attract, recruit, train, and retain great people. Again, anyone that wants to send in a question before the formal Q&A part, you're welcome to. Just send it to @Pace eLab. Let's, for both Ted and Andy, there's, I'm sure that there's a lot of lessons you have. We have in the audience both entrepreneurship students, an international entrepreneurship class and a market research class. We have people that are interested in entrepreneurship, small business management. We have some exchange students from Germany here, as well as a number of other companies. Can you talk a bit about, some thoughts you would share with students on both getting into business, starting a business, working for a small business, how to really distinguish themselves, and, also just in the marketing field in general?
We have sort of 10 tips. Would this be a good point to do that? So we sort of created
everything will work.
10 tips. The first 5 will be handled by Ted, and they really focus a little more on starting a business. And then I have 5 additional tips on running a business. So this is the least sophisticated PowerPoint in the history of presentation, but here we go for tip number 1.
The first tip I would say is start with an existing client base. And I mentioned to you Puerto Rico, I mentioned New South Wales, Australia. If you start with nothing, well, I don't know, let me ask you this question. How many people here have seen Shark Tank on television? Raise your hand. A lot of people, Shark Tank. One interesting program. The major reason that they don't put any money in these companies is because they have no track record. And that's why if you're going to start a business, you want to have some kind of track record. And one way is to have a couple of clients. We not only had those 2 clients, but those 2 clients spoke for us, and that helped us. There's a substitute for that. And only students and alumni at Pace University are going to have that. And that's really what we're going to talk about afterward, a little bit later. But it is the idea of trying this out in a test way. I can only tell you that if I had only had the opportunity to do that at the beginning and find out we were wasting our time with underdeveloped areas, we weren't wasting our time, but there are a lot of difficulties. The places were unstable politically. They had no experience with marketing. They often didn't have a budget. When you deal with more sophisticated areas, it's much better. It took us approximately 3/4 of a year to learn that. If we had been able to have a small program looking at marketing possibilities, we could have gotten over that thing right away, and that would have been a really good start. You guys are going to have that opportunity, and I believe it's the only place that will have that opportunity. I'll be talking about that in a minute. Let me talk about the second thing. Yeah, the second one is get a good accountant. Get a good accountant, and let me again tell you my experience. I guess a couple of days before I actually started the firm, I developed a very elaborate business plan. Very elaborate business plan. Well, the first year, the second year, different budgets and so forth. And I showed it to our accountant, Marvin Rosenbaum, and he said, "You have a copy of this?" I said, "Yes." He said, "You mind if I tear it up?" I said, "No, if you want to." He tore it up. And he said, "Don't do that." He said, "The first year, what you want to do is if you can get free space instead of paying rent, do that. If you can get your relatives to work with you, don't take a salary. Try to get people to work for free so that you keep your costs as low as possible." And that's what saved us during the first year that I described to you, the series of problems that we went through. So a good accountant who will emphasize that things will go wrong and keep your costs low when they do go wrong. Okay, third one. Sell like hell. Sell like hell. You guys...
His favorite one. So.
It is. You guys have a lot of ideas. I mean, I can just see this room is filled with people with ideas. The point is, you know about them. The market doesn't know about them. I would suggest to you, don't start out with a lot of advertising or publicity or other ways to market. The best kind of marketing is really belly-to-belly selling. Figure out who your best prospects are and then go after them. And that's the only way that I know of to really start a business successfully. You can be the best idea in the world, but you've got to sell it. And the way to sell it, by the way, is to think like a client, not like yourself. Not if a client thinks this is my idea, not your idea, it's absolutely the best way to sell. It's through the eyes of the client. At least that's what I tended to find. Number 4. All right, here we go. Learn from your mistakes, and I mentioned that the big mistake we made was going the wrong end of the market. You're all going to make mistakes if you go ahead, and I sure as hell hope you do go ahead. But when you make a mistake, don't get crushed by it. It's very easy to do that, and you can develop a kind of a cynical attitude. The whole thing didn't really work, and it was much safer having a job. Don't do that. I didn't do that, and I'm very happy that I didn't, because each time we made a mistake, we tried to learn something from that mistake, and that's what I think you should do. Last one is good luck. You're going to hear in your courses, and I'm sure from the people you talk to, all about the advantages of very careful planning, and quantification of material, big data. All those things are important. But I think luck is one of the most important things, at least in our particular firm. The key thing, though, is to capitalize upon the luck. You're going to have good luck. But if you capitalize upon it, as I did when I sat on that bench, would have been as easy as anything to have said to David Weintraub, look, I'm going to be going back to New York. I'm going to develop a presentation, and I'll send it to you. That sitting with him for that 4 hours, once the luck was that he sat next to me, that was smart. And that's I always tried to do that. When a piece of good luck came along, tried to quickly capitalize upon it. Because everybody who starts a new business has good and bad luck. But if you can capitalize on the good luck, you're way, way ahead. So those are 5 things that I would think will help you in starting a business. And he's going to talk about 5 things that might help you in growing a business.
Let's see. Whoops. The first here is to focus on client renewal. This really applies to a service business. Ted said that he told you to sell like hell. He had to sell like hell because our renewal rate was so terrible in the early years. When I first got DCI, I decided to calculate, okay, of the clients we started with on January 1st, how many are still around on December 31st? And I found that only about 40% were. So we were losing 60%. It was kind of like a revolving door in terms of he would sell new stuff, we would lose that. And then, they would come in and it was like getting on and off a city bus in terms of, as new people were getting on the front of the bus, others were getting off the back, and it didn't allow for any growth. We've gotten to a point now where we've improved the renewal rate to around 80%. Our goal is to get to about 90%, but it's a very hard climb as you get to those numbers. But focusing on client renewal is probably number one for me. I've sort of shared with you the second one as well. We have grown by gaining a larger share of clients. So we've done that by adding more services. So whereas we used to provide one primary service, public relations, we now provide many other different services. So it allows a client to choose 3 or 4 from our different suite of services that we offer, and it allows us to go from one size client to a much, much larger client. So that would be number 2. In Bruce's question, we hit upon this next one: make smart hiring decisions. One of the things Ted said to me when I started, he said, Andy, always hire people smarter than you are. And my response, of course, was, well, Ted, that's easy for you. But anyway, it's not easy for him. He's a very smart guy. I've gone through a lot of different things in terms of how we go about hiring. I didn't mention probably the most important thing that we do. We have a great internship program. And so we only take on interns who have graduated from college. So they're either in graduate school or they've, a recent undergraduate, left their undergraduate school. And so if I look at our whole office of 54 people, 25% of the people working at DCI today started out as interns. So the internship program has proven a really good way to make smart hiring decisions. I mentioned open book management. This is not common within most small firms or even large firms. I find it important to share our financials with our staff every month, give them some skin in the game that if DCI does well, they're also going to do well. So to me, it's just a logical way of operating, but it isn't very common in most business situations. And finally, the last one, achieve thought leadership in your niche. One of the reasons that we've been able to continue to successfully attract clients, and one of the things Ted did early on was we're in a very, very small niche, economic development and tourism marketing, basically place marketing. If you do a good job, basically people tell their friends, and that's the way we've grown. Now you have to be very careful, because if you do a bad job, then you can guess what happens. They tell their friends. And so we've cultivated a position of thought leadership. So we are, in our little space, we're the big dog, and we speak, we do research, we write, we do a lot of things that continue to raise the profile of the firm, and that's I think an important component of our success.
Including, I think, in any field that you get into, there's going to be some kind of trade association. I think, Andy, you might comment again on, in our case, the International Economic Development Council.
Yeah, I mean, there are different sides to our business. In our economic development side, it's the International Economic Development Council. On the tourism side, it's a couple of different tourism organizations. We're so tightly allied with those organizations that I serve on the board of one. The head of our tourism division serves on 2 or 3 boards of other ones. And I think, that's where our prospective clients gather. And so it's a very good place for us to have a dominant force.
Okay, I'm just going to turn off the light and raise that so you don't have a light in your eyes. And actually, your point number 5 kind of leads to a question that was tweeted in by A.K. Schaefer. What's the best way to build a strong client base? Networking? So, you talked about that thought leadership in your niche. Is that a way that you built your client base by being the thought leader that people come in? And what are some other ways to really build a strong client base?
Go ahead.
I'll mention one. Each of you people are thinking about a specific business in a specific field. In that field, there is at least one trade association and at least one trade publication that's extremely important. In our field, there are probably the Wall Street Journal is the most important. And if you can author an article, particularly if it's provocative and particularly if it's controversial about the business that you're trying to start, perhaps attacking the other parts of that, I find that attacking is one of the best ways to be known. It's the story of David and Goliath. The small guy has to really fight the more conservative institutions, and a wonderful way of doing that is through an article or through being interviewed by a trade association publication. So you ought to look into what are the trade associations, what are the trade publications, because if you get known there, that's a damn good way to start.
I'll just expand on some of Ted's thoughts here. You're AK there, yes? Okay, good. Thank you for tweeting that in. More tweets. It's good. Ask questions, and we'll get to more of that, I think, Bruce, right?
Yep.
Okay. So the reason thought leadership is important is it creates the right environment for sales. For someone to hire you, they're taking a risk because either their boss or their board or their colleagues, if they hire your firm or they hire you and it doesn't work out, they kind of look like an idiot and they might be fired. Or, some bad things happen when people make mistakes in hiring firms and that sort of thing. So if you obtain a position of thought leadership, it takes away some of the risk for them. They say, gosh, this firm is a safe choice. This is kind of like a layup in terms of a decision for us because, they've done this for 50 other places like us. I see them at these conferences that I go to all the time. I read about stuff that they do. This is a safe choice. So it doesn't, it sets the right environment for sales. So that's number one. The second part is the selling part, which Ted has done so marvelously over his career. And I think he sort of hit upon it is, the key is to think like the client. You have to, the most important rule that I've learned in sales is to put yourself in the prospective client's shoes. And the better you can understand them, the more you can understand their challenges, the more likely you are to craft a program and create a relationship with them that's going to make it a comfortable decision to hire you. So I think the combined of the thought leadership, but then also being a good salesperson by sort of understanding their situation are the 2 most important things, I would say.
I'd add a little extra to that. If you can come up with an idea when you're dealing with a client, and the client can think it's his or her idea, that's much, much better. Many salespeople, when they're trying to sell their ideas, they're selling themselves, and their ego becomes involved. What you really want to do is ride on the ego of your clients, of your customers, because if they feel it's their idea and they came up with it, it's a heck of a lot better than you boasting about yourself. So I think that's important.
And I think, 2 things that were mentioned, selling and luck. Just wanted to mention, selling, I was at a conference of university with the president of the National Venture Capital Association. All these students were asking questions about, landing a job in venture capital and, getting involved in that field. And he made the point, and again, he's the president of the trade association, said, I really don't understand why so many students are interested in venture capital. It's going to be extremely hard to get venture capital as a entrepreneur. Less than 0.4% of startups receive institutional venture capital. And it's going to be next to impossible for you to get a job in venture capital. That you need a golden resume, a golden Rolodex, a golden bank account. They're very small. And I don't understand why more schools aren't focused on selling and sales management, because that's what it really takes to get a business started. And I noticed in classes, is people are very interested in taking classes, again, around something related to high finance, venture capital, strategy, marketing, because they're kind of sexy and exciting, but sales is the lifeblood of every organization. I was giving a talk overseas, and when the first person asked, how many of you people here are entrepreneurs? 95% of the hands went up. And a second speaker asked, how many people are you in the audience are involved in selling? And only like 2 hands went up out of 100. I got up, I'm like, you all said you're entrepreneurs, but only 2 of you are selling. What do you do, if you're an entrepreneur, but you have to sell. And on luck, because they're very important. It's funny, if I put a question on an exam about, things that are important in luck, everyone always assumes that's the question that's wrong. But it's not. But luck isn't just, hoping, standing around. One of my favorite entrepreneurs, who's not a business entrepreneur, he's a professor at Carnegie Mellon University, Randy Pausch, who wrote the story, The Last Lecture. I don't know if you've heard about it. But he talked about luck, and he described luck as where preparation meets opportunity. And you work hard and you find those opportunities. They don't just fall like manna from the sky. And someone else, the harder I work, the luckier I get. So I think there were some great lessons, and we will have a chance for Q&A for the audience, and we're a bit ahead of schedule, which is a wonderful position to be in. But before we do that, I'd like to ask Pat Levine to join us on the stage, and we're going to kick off the Ted and Pat Levine Entrepreneurship Initiative. Not very long ago, just a few months, our Lubin's Director of Development, Nina, who's here, Restuccia, brought this opportunity. Ted and Pat, as you see, are successful in business, and we're looking for something to do to share that success and what they've done with students, and looked at a number of different schools. And Ted is not an alum of Pace University. He's an alum of Cornell. And, we're very fortunate that he came across Pace. And I'm going to let Ted talk about, the impetus, of why he started. And we'll have a discussion. And then I'm going to go through with you, because you may be interested, but the timeline, the requirements, and the application process for these grants. But I just want to say that my background is not academic. I started working on Wall Street a few blocks away from here. It was very entrepreneurial. I was given a phone and the computers that just came out, and did a lot of trading. Took off and went sailing for a few years. So I actually did sail to Trinidad. It's a wonderful place, and had the opportunity to travel quite a bit for work. As an aside, I'm a Pace alum, and I was the first person to graduate with the degree in international management. And I've worked in a little over 24 countries and traveled to over 60 of them. So, I've had some great opportunities, but I've also started a couple companies, both in the United States and overseas, one in Trinidad. And just by chance, the other one was in New South Wales. I went to graduate school at the Australian Graduate School of Management, which is Sydney University and the University of New South Wales. And I started a company there called Stock Central, which grew to the 3rd largest finance site in the country. And even as a student, my first month, we had $50,000 in online ad revenue from CNBC, and was offered over $1 million for the company within a year. and I was there on a scholarship, so that was nice to come across that. And when I had also started a company in Annapolis called Annapolis Maritime. So for me, starting a company was a great way to put my passion into something, and was very rewarding and fulfilling. And you heard that about Ted, how he just loved going to work every day. And I think you've heard some of that, enthusiasm of building a company from Andy. So I know for me, entrepreneurship was a wonderful opportunity, and not just in terms of starting a business, but an entrepreneurial mindset. I mean, the way that I've come to Pace and have this position, as a professor and the executive director of the Entrepreneurship Lab, I think was from the entrepreneurial mindset. So I think it's a wonderful opportunity. I'm excited, again, that it's here at Pace. And I if I could, Ted, if you would speak a little bit about why this was so important to you and what you'd like to see come out of it. And then we'll go into the mechanics of, applying for the grants.
Yeah, I think I can. Well, let me first, when you mentioned New South Wales, I have to just tell you one story about New South Wales. We had the New South Wales account for about, 25 years. But in the early years, the Prime Minister, the Premier of New South Wales was an old man called R.J. Heffron. And he was kind of an old-fashioned, he was sort of entrepreneurial himself, guy who had tremendous energy, tremendous passion, but not so good on details or figures. And we had him speak at the New York Economic Club, which is a very elegant club in New York, which has only top speakers. We got him speaking there, and he was explaining that in many ways, Australia and the United States are similar in the sense that they're about the same size. They have similar resources and similar gold rush in both places. But he said there's one great big difference. He says the Australian is a much smaller country. It's about 10% of the population. He said, there are only 18 billion people in Australia. It's kind of a shocked silence. 18 billion is...
Million.
No, he said billion.
Oh, he
and
said
so,
billion.
Afterward, we had a question period, and one of the press people said, I don't think there are 18 billion people in the world. He said, I think it's 18 million. And Heffron said, million, billion, I can never tell the difference between those two. That's sort of an Australian-type politician. When you talked about the starting a business, I think one of the big things to me was really my experience in Puerto Rico. And I'll be very honest about it. When I started with Puerto Rico, it was very much of the spirit, and I don't know how many of you have read about the New Deal, but the first 100 days of the New Deal when President Franklin Delano Roosevelt came into power were tremendously exciting. And that was the feeling I had when I was first with Puerto Rico. But as time went on, it began to get more and more bureaucratic, more and more overstaffed, and I was in a position where I really wanted to do as good a job as I could for this underdeveloped island that was part of the American economy. And I was getting in everybody else's hair because I was trying to do far too much, and they were trying to build a big staff, a big budget, and I became very cynical about it, and I really wanted to be on my own. I didn't want to have endless rules and endless complications. I'll just mention one other point about that, because one of the great things about being an entrepreneur is you're on your own. I'll mention one of the challenges that I had when we started, and it was interesting to me. I started the firm, and suddenly I got a letter from the Department of Justice in Washington. And anybody who's a young person, as I was, Department of Justice, you sort of saw guys with guns and blue suits, who are going to capture you and put you in jail. We had this form that was sent to us, about 14 pages, to fill in terms of every single foreign client we had. That's still true. It's called the Foreign Agents Registration Act. And I looked at that damn thing, and I figured I can do nothing but fill in that form. And I figured, maybe the whole thing isn't worth it. But I called a guy who I knew, a Canadian, at the Canadian consulate in New York. And I said to him, I'm thinking of stopping this whole thing, at least as far as foreign countries are concerned, because it's so damn complicated. He said, let me tell you something, Ted. He said, what you do is what they do is they look at every single line and to see that if you filled in something. But what you fill in doesn't make a damn bit of difference. You just have to fill in every line in the 14 pages. And he said the key words are does not apply. Does not apply. So we filled in the few things that did apply, and then we put in does not apply in all the other places. And for a couple of years, that's the way we filled in that form. It wasn't the great challenge that I really had thought it was going to be. But you're on your own, and that's just a marvelous feeling. You make your own mistakes. You learn what you are doing, and you're making a contribution. Once you start hiring people, that's a very exciting thing. It's not only, as Andy says, I think it's an art. You have to do it very carefully. But it's very satisfying to see people come in and you realize, gee, you are responsible for the hiring of people. In the United States, small business is still the heart of our country. And boy, somebody's going to have to get into it because it's not doing very well. It needs a whole bunch of entrepreneurs like the people in this room.
Thank you. So, that when we spoke earlier, that kind of patriotism, I think is very genuine. I'm actually going to London tomorrow to speak at a conference, and one of the things that I'll be speaking on in a couple workshops actually is New York City's entrepreneurial ecosystem. And there's going to be like 250 university entrepreneurship centers from around the world. And a lot of people look to the U.S. and the entrepreneurial spirit we have here. In China with all their growth, they keep asking themselves, when are we going to get a Steve Jobs? Japan, where I'd gone to school before transferring from Pace, they were a great economy, but they don't have an entrepreneurial economy. And for the last 2 decades, they've been in a recession. And almost every net new job in the last 2 decades have been created by an entrepreneurial firm, a firm that's less than 4 years old with less than 100 people. And, and that's where the jobs are. And it's so important, for our economy to have that. And it's interesting, you talk about hiring someone. We have an entrepreneurial implementation class that's held in the lab this afternoon. And one of the things they had to do today was go out and interview an entrepreneur. I think there's a couple of the students in the audience. And one person said, when you hire someone, it's very satisfying, but there's this huge weight because now you're responsible for them, for their family and everything. So it is a very important part of our economy, entrepreneurship. So let me not ask a question. Let me just talk about the initiative, because some of you are interested in, okay, what exactly is it and how do I apply and what's the process? So the Levines made a grant to Pace and for the next couple years, and it may be endowed longer. But the idea is that every year we'll give either 3 $5,000 grants or 2 $7,500 grants. So these are outright grants for a student or a recent alum to test a proof of concept. Is this concept worth me going and trying to build a business around? And that's, again, there's no equity, no percent of sales. It's not a loan. There's no interest. It doesn't have to be repaid back. It's just a grant. And the money is not for your own marketing, like to have parties to see who's interested. It's to get the equipment and supplies that you need for the business. And the Entrepreneurship Lab will help manage that procurement process. But let me just quickly say what the timeline is. So today is the kickoff of it. If you want to see all this information, you could take copious notes, or you could just go to pace.edu/Levine. Very easy to remember, pace.edu/Levine. And so today's the kickoff. The deadline to apply is October 20th. So there's a few weeks. And then on November 10th, we'll announce the finalists. Then on December 15th, there will be an announcement of who the award winner is. And then from January, the following semester, the project plan and implementation, review will begin, and then it will be a year-long process. And the following year, we'll have the same process again. So as far as the application, you'll see everything's online. If you go to pace.edu/Levine, it'll have all the requirements. But let me just say what those requirements are. So one is you're either a Pace student or a recent alum. You've graduated within the last 2 years. Register as an eLab student associate, which will take 5 minutes. Again, the Entrepreneurship Lab is just a block away at 163 William Street. It's not supposed to be like a library open to anyone who pops in, but it's not some kind of exclusive club. We just want you to register so we know more about you and how we could better serve you and match you up with other people that have similar interests. And then you have to do just one of two other things, either be enrolled in one of the entrepreneurship classes or have taken it. And that's at the undergraduate or graduate level. They have the same title: Venture Initiation and Entrepreneurship, Small Business Management, Entrepreneurial Implementation, or the Business Plan Development class. Okay, so that's one thing. And again, the idea was to weave our curriculum into this, or be in the Blackstone Veterans Entrepreneurship Bootcamp. So again, it's open to any military veteran. We're running free boot camps, all paid for by Blackstone, the Blackstone Charitable Foundation. And the third way is just to compete or plan to compete in one of our 3 main entrepreneurship contests. That's the Pace Pitch Contest, which will be celebrating its 11th year this year, the Pace Mobile App Design Contest, or the Business Plan Competition. Okay, and then the application process is, 1, complete the online application form. And again, you'll see that at pace.edu/Levine. And then we just ask for 4 documents. That's a 1-page executive summary, a detailed proof of concept, including a preliminary budget and some general milestones, a biography, just a brief biography, a couple hundred words on you, and a letter of recommendation. And then if you get to one of those finalists, we'll probably pick, depending on the application pool, like 3 to 5 finalists, and then narrow it down to a couple of winners. So that's the timeline, the requirements, and the application process. And I'd like to, again, we're ahead of schedule, which is great. So we'll have more time for Q&A and networking. But what I'd like to do now is open it up for questions. Again, you're free to tweet them in, and that could be to Ted, Pat, or Andy Levine on any of the stuff that was covered today, or on the grant themselves.
Bruce, can I just make a quick comment? I think if I was one of you guys, I'd be trying to think about what is meant by proof of concept. And it could be many different things, so I want to just mention a couple. You might, at the beginning, just as development counselors, you might really want to do a marketing study to find out what exactly a market is. That would have helped us. Or, as Bruce mentioned before, you might want to actually be paid in terms of getting materials or equipment for if it's a product. Or you might conceivably want to hire an expert who could help you with the business. Or you might want to do a special event. But that's really the basic idea. Try to figure out, what could I do that would test this thing out and see whether it will actually work? That's what I want to put the money into, is people who have good, interesting, projectable ideas of how to turn a concept into a specific project. And that's what we will be interested in funding for up to $7,500. Don't do it for $7,500 because it's really what we can go up that high, but you may be able to do this for $3,000. Some kind of idea. You've been thinking about your ideas. How are you gonna make them work? How can you prove them out? Because if other people put money in this, the first thing they're going to say is, how do I know it's going to work? And if you do this project, it seems to me it's similar to having previous clients. You have a track record. That's the idea. That's the original idea I thought of, was that it would allow companies, entrepreneurs, budding entrepreneurs, to have a record that they can show to others and can help them succeed.
And, if this is an area you're interested, I briefly mentioned the class. We have a new course called Management 320 Entrepreneurial Implementation. And it's not about making plans or giving pitches. It's about actually implementing some aspect of your business in the market and getting some form of validation. And it's we've had some great concepts, and it's great to see people getting out of the classroom and actually doing this. So with that, any questions, again, for the grant, et cetera? And we have one of the associates at the lab with a microphone. So
Yes.
up here and here, let me just give you the microphone, please.
Okay, how's it going? My name is Mike, and I'm gonna paraphrase something you said. And so you said, come up with an idea that makes the client think it's their idea. Ride their ego instead of boasting about why you're so good, right? Can you give an example of what that means, or how you've done that, or how to do that?
Well, I'll start. Maybe Andy wants to do the same thing. I think the first thing you do, it's more the web, and I'm not an expert in using it. Andy is, but finding out about the client, what's their motivation, what's their record, finding common ground with them. So when you meet with them, you really know something about them. I think that's terribly important. And then it seems to me, in your discussion, you're trying to find out what are their special interests, because they can really help you. Just as I sat on that bench with that guy, and it wasn't me selling, it was both of us developing a program. It's a partnership between the guy who's being sold and the guy who's selling, and they work together. And I think if you know something about that person, if you honestly ask questions about them, what was the biggest success you ever had? Particularly flattering questions like that. What made you start this? What are you, so you really, you get to know them, and then pretty soon you get to think like them, and then pretty soon you're suggesting an idea that they really think is their own. That's the perfect sale to me.
Jump in on that a bit. One question I like to ask people after I've created a little bit of rapport with them is, what keeps you awake at night? And it's sort of getting at what is their point of pain, what is concerning to them, and then if I can, when they give me their answer, here's what's keeping me awake at night, here's what I really worry about every day, it allows me to say, is there something I can do to take away that pain? And is there something I can do to help with that? And if I understand their point of pain and I can match something that DCI does to alleviate that, I've got a good chance at achieving success on this. I guess the only other point I would make, and I'll do this using this Pepsi can, is when Bruce says sales, and you all think sales, what is the first image that comes to your mind? Who do you think of when you hear the word sales?
Used car.
Used car salesman. And that is why I think, no one wants to raise their hand when we say sales. But the key to successful sales is not saying, gee, this is a wonderful product, you should really drink this is fantastic, is saying, are you thirsty? Trying to find out how this might help you. And so, I think what Ted has said, and hopefully I can even simplify it, is the more you can understand their situation and then tailor your solution to it, that's great. Now, you may find that I don't have a solution to your problem, and if that's the case, just walk away. Doesn't sound like I can help you. Doesn't sound like we have a match here. Maybe in 2 years or 3 years, there will be a problem that you have that I can help you with, but right now I can't help you. That establishes your credibility for a later opportunity. But as I hear you talk about what keeps you awake at night, it allows me to see if I have a solution, something that might help.
I want to just a little bit to that. New South Wales. Yeah. In New South Wales, why there are often personal things about a client that have very little to do with what you're doing, but you're willing to help them. And when we first worked for New South Wales, I won't go into too much detail, but one of the things that was the most important objective of this particular client was to get an honorary degree at Harvard University. And he wrote on a little piece of paper because he didn't want to say it. He pushed it toward me and said, can you get me an honorary degree at Harvard University? The last thing I wanted to say was no. So I said, well, look into it. And what we found out is that basically to get an honorary degree, you either have to do something that's important for the university or provide a lot of money. And what we finally found out was that when he was the chancellor at the University of New South Wales in Australia, they had a companion program with Duke University, and it was very successful. And we got that, we didn't get at Harvard University, we got at Duke, which is a good university, and it was very important to his career. So it didn't have much to do with selling New South Wales, but he was a client, and as a client, we had to try to find something to help his personal agenda, and sometimes that's very important. Yeah, use the microphone.
Good evening. I'm John. Nice to meet you. So they say logic in sales is like is like a gun without ammunition, and like you want to go after emotion. So like, what are some of your best emotion evoking questions when you sit down in a consultation interview with the client?
I don't agree with the premise. Do you, Andy? I don't think it's a mixture of passion and emotion, but also of facts. You got to really have the facts. It seems to me, particularly for certain clients, a very factual approach really works, and that's always terribly important in any client, is to have the facts at your command. It's not a question of baloney or of fooling somebody. It's a question of really building an argument that will work. You've got to believe it's going to work first. Otherwise, you're going to have to sell anything successfully.
I'll just add, on Ted talked a little about sort of personal connections and that sort of thing, and gave the example of the guy from New South Wales. On the back of my business card, I have, paraphrasing here, but it's our job to help our clients become heroes within their communities. And to me, that's sort of I think the emotional side that you're getting at is if the prospective client feels that you're going to help me become a hero within my organization or within my community, anything you do for their organization might be good, but if you can help them with their own personal agenda, that's probably more important to getting a yes decision out of things. So I don't know if that directly relates to your question, but okay.
Somebody pointed out that none of us work on things. We all work for people. And, you want to know what's going to get someone motivated. What does their boss, care about and want them to do? And as far as selling and sales and emotion, I like to show the clip of William H. Macy in Door to Door. Familiar with that? Where he played someone that had cerebral palsy. He was just this persistent salesman. And he rose to be the largest, it's a true story, the most performing salesman in his area. And even on I don't know if you saw the movie Wall Street, the character Jordan Belfort, he was famous for when he was interviewed, he'd give someone a pen and say, okay, sell me this pen, similar to the example that Andy gave with a Pepsi. And it's not, oh, this pen is such and such. It's like, tell me about yourself and getting to understand them. It's the old cliche about put yourself in someone's shoes, but it really has to do with, empathy and real understanding. And a cliche in business that I don't believe is if you build it, they will come. It's not about making a product and having people find it. It's about solving an unmet need or providing, a benefit or bundle of benefits to someone. And, and then selling that and to sell something, you have to believe in it. So great questions. Who else? Okay, please, Scott. Pass the mic.
Hi, everyone. My name's Latiana, and I just have a general mindset question. I watched a recent YouTube video, and a guy, he said, students like us, so from the late 80s or the 90s, we're like a soft generation, so to speak. So we want things really quick. We almost want the product too as soon as we think of it. We just want it in the now. So what do you think is a skill or number of skills that young entrepreneurs are missing in their either general mindset while they're creating the business or their business model?
What skill are entrepreneurs today?
Yes, a young entrepreneur.
Great question. Let me think on that for a moment here. And I'm sort of going back to something we said already. I don't think most are able to put themselves in the customer's shoes. and they're unable to make that transition. They're so excited about their product. They're so excited about what they're doing. They're so excited about the benefits of what they're offering. I think they have trouble putting themselves in the customer's shoes. And going back to sales, I think there's a bit of a distaste for feeling I have to hawk my product, or I have to talk about this. I shouldn't have to. It should sell itself. And I don't think you have to think of sales as the used car kind of example that we've talked about here. You should feel very proud to be selling your product and talking about your product and what you've developed. But I think for most, there probably is this sort of inability to put themselves in the customer's shoes, and then the sort of distaste about trying to sell their product. My product is great. People should flock to it, I think, is sort of somewhat the entrepreneurial mindset that I hear. Bruce, you probably have more experience in this than Ted and I or Pat. I don't know if you have a good answer on that one.
No, I think it is a very, very good question. And I do think it comes to, separating yourself and your idea. I like to say there's a difference between, passion and persistence and arrogance and stubbornness. You don't just stick with it and expect some very quick idea. It's the idea of and I know it's a cliche, put myself in the customer's shoes and find some unmet need, provide some benefit or a bundle of benefits, and not being, one, so sure of yourself, and two, expecting immediate gratification, which I think is one of the things you're pointing to. There's a great new movement called the Lean Startup. A very good book is called The Lean Startup by Eric Ries. And it talks about, he was developing an avatar-based instant messaging thing. And what does it matter if you develop everything on time and on budget if it's not what people want? So the most important thing is to create a minimal viable product, or MVP. And this is what the grant will help do. And then get it out in the hands of people and get some feedback and separate yourself and your emotion from logic. So we've had some great guest speakers here. One, Gurbash Chahal, not too long ago. He's on his fourth company. Just an incredible entrepreneur. And he talked about that. You have to separate, emotion and your emotion and logic. And he talked about when he was a young entrepreneur. He's only 30 now. So he sold his first company at 18 for 30 million. His second company at age 25 for 300 million. His third company was near an IPO with close to $1 billion valuation, and he's on his fourth company. But he said, the important thing is that, idea of separating, your emotion from the business logic, and, being in it for the long haul. You heard about some failures. You have to, have some patience and persistence. So, I think where we're used to, very short attention spans, 140 character tweets, one paragraph, Zagat reviews, everything else, instant messaging, that idea of stepping back, having a little patience and persistence, but, again, separating your emotional attachment to the idea and seeing what does the market want, and I'm here to solve someone else's problem or provide someone else with a benefit.
If I could go at your question maybe one other way too, and you sort of hit upon it, Bruce, but spend an awful lot of time understanding your market. The better you can understand who you're trying to sell to, the more likely to succeed. Ted talked about when he started out at DCI, his whole thought was, I'm going to work for nothing but third world countries. And he found out very, very fast in the first 6 months that, he sort of became tired of coups occurring and military juntas, and as a result, he was able to switch gears quickly and give up, I think, that dream of helping third world countries, but to help more established places, and that became a path to success for him.
And just for everyone, let's take maybe 2 or 3 more questions. Everyone's been patient. I do want to have time, to network with each other, to ask questions, maybe to come up and ask for a business card. So thank everyone for your patience. But let's get just 2 or 3 more questions, and then we'll wrap things up.
Yes, there's one right there.
So, what would you say makes the perfect candidate to join your internship program? Like when you interview your applicants, what do you think makes someone like outstand from all the others?
Great question. And we've never had an intern from Pace before, and we'd love to. So, what we look for in both an intern and frankly we look for in any staff member is the trait of responsibility. We look, kind of if someone says they're going to do something, is there a track record of they actually do that? And you can ask that, or you can try to uncover that by asking certain questions of them. You can try to uncover that in reference checks that you do on people. But basically, do they demonstrate that trait of responsibility? About half the people that I interviewed demonstrate that trait. But I think that's the single greatest flaw we have in interns or new staff members that we hire is not having that trait of follow through and sort of doing what they say they're going to do. Other traits we look for is just optimistic, upbeat attitude. I think that's very important in any new thing that you're trying. Certainly we want to know about creativity as well. I like to ask the question, I said, if you're in a group of people that are brainstorming, do you tend to be the person offering ideas or are you building on the ideas of others? And there's sort of two paths that people can go there. What I'm really looking for is someone who's offering new ideas. It's important to build on the ideas of others, but to demonstrate creativity, I'm looking for the person who's offering new ideas.
Yeah, I wanted to just mention, in terms of young people, I'm always interested, when I was the CEO, I'm interested in people who are interested in the whole business instead of just what's my job going to be. They're interested in the whole business, and I often cite an example. We had an intern years ago, and he was a nice guy, but one day we decided we're going to have a demonstration room, a conference room in the office, and we had a room, but the lighting was lousy, and so I went to the management of the building and I said, "Gee, can you put up track lighting like you have here on the ceiling so it'll help make the room look nice?" And the management told me, "Well, you'll have to get union electricians to do that, and it's going to cost, I don't know, something like $500. No, it's more than that. It's about $1,800 now I think of it." And I went back to the office, and I was really furious because it seemed to me this could be done in a short time, and it was absolutely lousy. And I was kind of talking to myself and to my partner. This intern, a young man, suddenly came over and he said, "I heard what you said, and by golly," he said, "I can come in on the weekend and put up that lighting for $300. And I said, "If you can do that, we'll take the $1,500 saving and you and I will both share it." And that was to me, the perfect kind of intern. Somebody who really cared about the whole business rather than just what's my little job in it. I always look for people who were interested in DCI all in all and interested in the whole company and what it was doing, not just the specific task that they had. If they were in tourism, I'd like to see them know a little about economic development or about trade marketing. Really interested in the whole thing.
Let's take perhaps two more questions, and so that you guys see if there are two. And by the way, there are several professors here. They're most welcome to posit a question. Anyone? Yes, one over here.
I was going to ask, how often do you step back and plan where you want to go or what you want to do? Or do you more focus on what's currently working well or not working well and push in those directions?
Yeah. Well, I think that was one of the big differences between Andy and I. And I'm perhaps between starting a business and really operating a business. To me, each day brought new fuel and changed the view that I had. And I never really looked way ahead. I never had a business plan. I never really knew where we were going, but I knew where we had just been and what we learned from it. Andy, I think, took a very different view, and that's why the firm doesn't have 8 people or 12 people, which is what I think we had when he came in. It has 54 people, and I think, Andy, you might talk a little about the difference between.
Sure. I think in sort of looking at the long term, I'm probably stronger than Ted in terms of, he was looking at what are we going to do tomorrow. I probably can look about a year or two in advance, but my challenge is it's hard to look 5 years in advance, 10 years in advance. And I think, that's probably a shortcoming on my end. So I tend to be trying to look at, 48 months from now, what is this business going to look like? How are we going to improve it? What are we going to make better here? But it's more difficult for me to look beyond a 2-year window, and that's improved over time. In the beginning, I was looking at more like maybe a 6-month window, but that's probably a shortcoming of mine, not being able to look beyond 2 years. But better than looking beyond 24 hours. So.
Right. Is there, Casey, Aaron, any? I just want to give the last question to one of our professors, or Dr. From Seidenberg. We have international management, we have marketing, we have computer science. Dr. Coppola, would anyone like a question? All the pressure's on you. No, well, we'll take the last question over here then.
Hi, I just have a question so what advice will you give to current college students, because we're kind of a little bit lost because we don't know what we should do to build entrepreneurship skills and things like that.
You want to start with that, Ted? No, I'll start. Okay. My advice would be to never leave. Just stay in college forever. It's pretty comfortable. You look like you're having fun. We talk a lot about entrepreneurship here. Not everyone in this room is going to be an entrepreneur. And I do think it takes and frankly, I'm not an entrepreneur. What I am is an intrapreneur. I didn't start DCI. I came in and made something better and improved upon it and grew it. But I didn't have the appetite for risk that an entrepreneur has. So, I don't know if it's 10% of this audience, 5% of this audience, 3%, 30% of this audience, but, some percentage of you will be comfortable attempting to become an entrepreneur. But, it's not for everyone. For those of you that go that path, obviously it can be very exciting, but it involves a much higher degree of risk than a safer path of, working for an established company. And, both can be fun, challenging, and wonderful. I think the advice I would give you is just to be open to things. You may have a very set path right now. I'm going to be a management consultant, or I'm going to work on Wall Street, or I want to be a professor somewhere. Ted had a very set path in terms of, he was planning to be a professor. And, he quickly saw that there was a better path for him. So I would just say, be open to being derailed and trying something completely different. I shared, for the first 30 years of my life, I gave zero thought to coming in and working at DCI, but it's worked out remarkably well for me.
Yeah, I wanted to call attention to another possibility. Not every entrepreneur has to be an individual person. Sometimes a group of people, a small group of people who have complementary skills and perhaps money as well, can come together with an idea. And that, I think, is an increasingly important pattern. The old idea that the entrepreneur is like Edison. He so many wonderful ideas and different from the rest of the people. Most good ideas require a team, and sometimes a team getting together and thinking something out is a good way to do it. And you can support each other in doing so. So that's a pattern that I have a feeling is becoming more and more possible, particularly as business gets more expensive and ideas get more sophisticated.
Just as a maybe final point, I wanted to pull my mother into this conversation here for a moment. What is it like to live with an entrepreneur?
Not easy.
Best two-word answer of the night.
I would just say that one thing I would offer as advice to anyone who is thinking about starting their own business is that if you have a partner or a spouse, I would hope that you would have their support, because one of the things was that I was very, very supportive of what Ted was trying to do. And so I think it really was very important to the business moving forward and also to our relationship. The other thing is that he, as you probably know by now, is an idea person, and he's not always the most practical person. And I think that when you're just starting, you got to figure, you need an office, you need a desk, He wouldn't think of things like that. I mean, we got the office, we got the desk, but we only had one phone. Well, how can you sell and also expect maybe a possible client to call in? So in other words, I provided a little more of the practical approach. And I think, it all worked out.
And my mother worked in the business for how many years?
Oh, for about 12 years, I think.
Okay, good.
Yeah. And then I decided to go a different route and go into politics.
Okay, so as a closing thought, whether you're going into entrepreneurship or not, looking for a job after graduation in this difficult economy, there was a British futurist economist named Charles Handy who predicted a lot of the changes going on in the world in employment and the nature of work. And when his son graduated from college and asked for career advice, Charles said to him, "Look for customers, not bosses." And what does that mean? Listen, if you graduate and you just say, "Tell me what to do, I'll say yes, sir, yes, ma'am, I'll do my best to do it, and you give me a paycheck," that's looking for a boss. Looking for a customer is, I have these skills, I have something to offer, I have some value I could give you. Maybe you're working for an older company that doesn't have an online or social media presence, and you say, in school I started this, I have a blog with 20,000 followers, Twitter, whatever. This is something I could bring to you. This is value I could add. So whether you're, looking at entrepreneurship or otherwise, I think that advice of look for customers, not bosses, is good. So let me sincerely thank you all for coming. What makes these events great is, the audience, the questions, the engagement. I'd again like to thank, the professors who brought their class, the Entrepreneurship Lab staff, and especially the Levines for their presence and their, program that they're doing at the university. And we have a small thanks, this solid dining steak Entrepreneurship Lab.
Wow. Thank you.
Let me do that to you. Again, we have plenty time for, we'll be